to the May. I got it. So everybody, welcome to the May meeting. Glad to see you all here. So I will make a motion to approve the agenda for today so we can get started. You have a second? Okay, or everybody all in favor, raise your hand. Yes, okay, thank you. The minutes were nicely done by our staff and sent out. If you have any corrections, otherwise I'll make a motion to accept. Second?
I'll second.
Okay, so we're done with that. Okay, chair's report. So the only thing it was very small report this month, and there's no bad news to report, which is really great. I do have here, there was a press event a short time ago at Grand Central with President Rinaldi giving adding on to the good news that Bajano and the new Transit Authority President, Richard Davey, talked about that the ridership has been up. Let me just refresh this in case they updated it. No, they didn't. That they had over 61% of subway and Staten Island Railway ridership, which was a new post-pandemic peak. That was yesterday. Before that, they were 60.3. The weekends were 67, 63. So weekends are doing better everywhere. Buses were up also, but we're interested in Metro North. So this past weekend, we had 90% on Saturday and 87 on Sunday. So the weekends are doing better. There's not enough people going back to work in the city. Ridership on Tuesday was 62%. So that's like one of the highest that I've seen here. So we just have to hope for more ridership coming back because we need it during the week. Otherwise, I don't have anything else to talk about. So I guess we'll do the next item will be the.
Excuse me, Randy?
Yes.
Is that the announcement that they're doing today?
Yeah, that's the one they did today. It was a trifecta of the two railroads and the transit authority having achieved post-pandemic record ridership. Can I ask Roz and Michael, are you guys receiving the press releases from the MTA? Because we arranged this years ago, and it's possible your names just weren't submitted. So who is not getting the daily press releases from the MTA when they're daily?
I'm not getting a daily press release.
Okay, so Jess, could you give Roslyn's name? Rich, are you getting them?
Yes.
Okay, how about Michael? Are you getting them?
I am not, no.
Okay, so yeah, it's just something that fell through the cracks here. It's our responsibility to notify them.
Francis, are you receiving them? Francis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're talking about the press clips that come out every morning?
Yeah, why not? The press clip, but also the press releases.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I arranged that when I was the chair back in 2017. Who was you weren't even here in 2017. So when asking you, he was a fairly well-known TV reporter who did that.
Okay.
Tim Minton is
No, yeah, but it wasn't him. It was somebody a long time ago. But I'll come up with his name.
he's not there probably anymore.
Right. Oh yeah, he left a long time. There've been such successive people taking over from him.
Ross has her hand raised.
Yes.
I just have a question, and maybe if I was receiving the press clips, this would be answered, but I wonder what the railroad strategy is around promoting mass transit in light of the fact that gas prices are so high, because it just amazes me that we spend all our time, not this group, but time is spent talking about how expensive gas is a gallon with no encouragement or incentives, or little, I would say, incentives to, just in terms of press strategy around, by the way, there's a railroad.
Well, she did talk about, Kathy did talk about the new fare initiatives, and he met, and Jim and General Lieber regularly mentions the city tickets for.
So is this like marketing? Because just mentioning it on meetings, I don't know if it gets to the population?
Well, Rosalind, there are, excuse me, a lot of ads. Sorry, hold on. There are a lot of ads that are in the subway system and at the commuter rail stations. I don't know if you've noticed them, but it's like blue signs that say "Ride the Railroad" and it goes over the fare discounts. But they've been doing that for a while, but they're not putting it into the context of how gas prices are skyrocketing. This is a better alternative. It's been geared to get ridership back.
And my question is, when I'm in the subway or in Metro North, I'm already your transit rider. My question is there a strategy to reach all these people sitting in their car paying $6 a gallon?
So the announcement, I think what Randy is referring to today was a press conference. So it was talking about,
regularly mentions the special fares.
but you're right, they don't put it in the context of rising gas prices. And I spoke to a reporter on Newsday the other day who did ask me specifically about, do you think that rising gas prices should drive ridership? And the answer is yes, but people have to make that decision themselves. Not everybody is comfortable getting back on a train. There are still the reality and the perception of safety issues. Some people haven't been on a train in 2 years, and it's going to take a lot more than $6 or $7 a gallon gas to get them on. So I think that's sort of what they have to tackle too.
Sorry, I kind of agree with Rosalind here. I think that, that there's a lot of effort going on clearly into developing these marketing messages that are deployed inside the system. And there's a lot of people outside the system who aren't seeing them. And I think she raises a great point. Is the MTA staff aware of that disconnect, and are they doing anything to close it?
And Lisa, just to add to your point about comfort level, one of my neighbors who's 82 was incensed because he took Metro North from New Rochelle to the city, and there was somebody sitting by him without a mask. He asked the conductor to ask the person to put on the mask. The conductor said they weren't allowed to do that. Now that I get, but
No, conductor was wrong.
wait. I'm responding to the point of why people aren't riding the railroad. So I go into Manhattan on Wednesday to get a haircut, right? And there are a couple of people without masks, and it's like, okay, I already hear that the conductors aren't going to say anything, so let me just deal with this. But what was even more annoying to me is the conductor gets on there and he makes his announcement about miscellaneous stupid stuff and never even says, we recommend you wear a mask. So if we want to increase ridership, I understand conductors not wanting to get into confrontations, but not even announcing it on the loudspeaker is like insane to me.
My experience is that
A recommendation, right? It's a requirement too.
yeah, it's just the state health commissioners has mandated that they continue doing it. My experience has been different. They have been making announcements on the Metro North trains I've been.
I'll also note this morning there was a departure there at the White Plains station. Anyway, they had people manning the front door of the station, actively handing out masks to anybody who entered without one. So, since the New York City Health Department recommendation changed with the upgrade on what was the 16th, Monday, they have been more aggressive this week.
Because it would be nice even because I think some people actually forget. I was looking at one lady who she felt uncomfortable, and I didn't know whether I could ask the conductor for a mask. So I guess my point is, one, they should announce it, and two, they should say, if you left your mask, I'm happy to give you one.
On the trains I've been on, I've seen that they do that, and that a lot of the conductors have them in their pocket. The difference between Metro North and Long Island Railroad is actually that the conductors on Metro North carry, or the train personnel on Metro North carry masks and can give them out. And on the Long Island Railroad, they do not and cannot and will not. So that whoever said that was incorrect.
Well,
But we'll reach out to, we'll make these points absolutely to our relationships at Metro North and let them know both about the marketing suggestions and refocusing them, maybe upping them. We can do this also. I mean, it's certainly something we can put out there. On gas prices too high, jump on board.
Yeah, you certainly could mention to the conductor, Ross, that that it would be nice that you represent commuters and you have direct access to Metro North and that they should just simply do their job. That's all we're asking. Yeah. I mean, I sat in the airport in Cancun yesterday. Every 15 minutes, they make an announcement in Spanish and in English to please wear a mask, please wear a mask. And people sit there, many of them were not wearing masks. I mean, we nothing can do about it, but there was no enforcement there. It was just left up to the passengers to do the right thing. I rode the Long Island Railroad about last month after the board meeting. I had to stay in the city later, so I took a ride out to look at the third track work. And I saw a whole bunch of Long Island Railroad employees got on the train at the Hillside facility, which is the huge maintenance facility, and very few of them were wearing masks. But it's just the way it is over there. All right, are we ready to talk about bike ped access?
Yes, I'm going to try this. So, as I think Rosalind and Mike, that you were part of the conversation or on the council when we had the conversation about the new legislation or the legislation that was passed last year that adds a member to our council, even though it does not specify how that member will be added. So we're still trying to figure that out. That adds a member to our council who will help to, who will be focused primarily on bicycle and pedestrian, helping us shape our bicycle and pedestrian recommendations to the MTA. This adds a new legislative mandate to PCAC and our councils to provide that additional focus. So it's sort of a first mile, last mile, as Robin was discussing earlier. But it's also how I think it was born a lot of people who want to be able to stay on their bikes and ride them over bridges, particularly the Verrazano. That's sort of what some of the backstory is. But as bicycle ridership has increased, people are particularly interested in being able to, take their bike to stations. Mike, that City Bike plays a big role in that, particularly at Grand Central, but it's not the same necessarily in each of the stations along the Metro North line. So PCAC has been charged with making a recommendation to the MTA by June 1st for bicycle and pedestrian access to MTA facilities. So I'm going to attempt to give a brief presentation that was given to us by the MTA, and I will hopefully be able to make this work and still talk at the same time. If I disconnect, I apologize. I'm working on an iPad that talks a little bit about their efforts, because they're required to develop a strategic plan that fits into the next capital program and the 20-year needs analysis. So let me see if I can do this.
That's like in a couple of weeks, June 1st.
It is. And so we want your input into, and let me see if I can share my screen here. Share screen.
We have someone that just joined us, Peter Ramos.
Yep.
Where is he from?
He's from Metro North, I believe.
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, I remember you from last month. Okay.
Okay, can you see my
Yes,
screen?
Yep.
Okay, so this presentation was given to us by Jessica Matthews, who is on the MTA and working on this project. And it talks about what the MTA is doing for their bike, pedestrian, and micro mobility access plan. So as I said, the state legislature passed legislation that requires the MTA to publish a strategic plan by the end of 2022. So they have this year to publish a plan that is supposed to take into consideration the recommendations that PCAC provides. In fact, Bradley and I have a brief call with Jessica after this to talk about the format that our recommendations are going to take. Again, our recommendations go to the MTA, not to the legislature. And the MTA's plan is a strategic plan that needs to, I believe, go out for public comment and include stakeholder input so that we'll have another opportunity to comment on it as well. So it'll include, the MTA's plan will include consideration of measures to improve bike access to bridge facilities, subway, bus, commuter rail stations, and on trains and buses where feasible. And again, we're required to submit our recommendations to the MTA by June 1st. This plan will include to look at, again, they're taking an expansive approach to developing a strategic action plan to promote bike, pedestrian, and micro mobility, which is sort of the larger context of first mile, last mile, and a variety of different modes. So they go into some numbers here about the explosive growth of cycling in the past decade, but you know, we've seen a lot of numbers about what the pandemic has brought and about how more and more people are in fact cycling as a method of commuting. That's probably less true in Metro North territory than it is in New York City boundaries, but it probably is, it probably has increased. And I don't know, Robin, if you have any information on this, between as a mode of getting to stations. So, you know, I think that as we look at our recommendations, some of the things that we might think about are how people get to the stations. What do you do with your bike or your scooter or your e-moped when you get there, and things of that nature. So what the MTA is, these are the MTA's core planning principles: transportation equity, to provide cycling and micromobility in their action plan that prioritizes affordability, access to jobs, and environmental justice. The elected officials that promoted this and made it become a reality are particularly interested also in the equity and environmental justice aspects of this as it relates to those who do not have access to cars and who use alternate vehicles as their primary mode of transportation. You know, I think as we've seen discounts become more prevalent, something we strongly support, as you all know. If we want to encourage even greater ridership for people who now have another avenue to use as transit, then we have to look at how everybody can access it. The MTA is committed to proactive stakeholder engagement and is working closely with city governments, private sector partners, including bike share companies, bike and pedestrian experts, advocates, and others. We're not bike and pedestrian experts. We do have expertise in the form of Bradley, and Kara has knowledge as well. And we need all of your input in order to help shape shaped a plan. There are recommendations, and their recommendations will look at a holistic, integrated approach that takes into consideration pedestrian, bicycle, micromobility access in all of its planning and capital project scoping processes, including as the MTA looks at improvements to bridges, roadways, stations, etc. Excuse me. These are some of the initial strategies for evaluation and some of the things that we should be thinking about also as we're making our recommendations. In New York City DOT basically owns the land around subway stations and bus stops. So if we or the MTA makes a recommendation, put bike racks here, this is a great place for city bike. This is not a great place for city bike. This sidewalk is so narrow. Are you kidding me? You can't put bikes here. How are you going to get bikes down the steps there? That's a different issue. But we need, the recommendations need to mesh with what city DOT is able to do in their street planning as well. At Long Island Railroad Metro North, the land use is a little bit different. There are some stations that are owned, managed by the railroads, but many of them are not. And so in large part, it's working with the municipalities to provide not just parking and other options, but also wayfinding and safe bike routes, whether they're separated, whether they're marked, whether there are sidewalks, and other ways for people to actually get to and from the stations. The third is looking at bike sharing services. That's your city bike, that's your Lime. Here in Seattle, there are, there's sort of the trifecta. It's the bicycles, the scooters, and the larger scooters, which we had in the city as Rebel, which have largely disappeared. We see some of the scooters around, and if you've been to Washington or other places, they may be neatly lined up, but in other places they just sort of fall over and are almost littered on the sidewalk. So,
Lisa, if I can just interrupt for a
Yeah.
quick second, do we have any idea how widespread bike sharing is outside of New York City and City Bike? I know White Plains had a program that was then fell by the wayside at the beginning of the pandemic. They're planning to reintroduce one in the coming months. Do we have any idea in the Metro North territory how widespread they are?
I do not. That's something, Robin, I don't know if
I
that's
was gonna say,
something
I don't know if it's my place to jump in, but
Please do.
Okay, we actually, I'm with MTA TOD's group, and we're, as if you were on the call before the meeting, I had mentioned that the group under me is working on the first mile, last mile study and development of a toolkit and pilot program. And we'll be presenting to the Metro North Commuter Rail Council in July. Our study, but one of the things that we did to kind of start is to kind of do the inventory outside of New York City, both on Long Island Railroad and Metro North suburban, the suburban stations only, and looking at what's there today, and we'll go through the whole presentation of where we are, but most importantly, there were a couple of pilots that were being done over the course of a few years. As you said, the city of White Plains had one. New Rochelle, I think, still has something going on. Theirs is they use dockless bikes, but they have geocoded them so they could only be parked in certain areas, which is much better. You don't get the litter of bicycles everywhere like you do when you have a dockless that doesn't have that fencing. The city of Yonkers also had a pilot. I think that is complete, but I understand that I think Ossining is also looking right now into doing some sort of pilot. And I think they are actually, they're seeking funds from New York State to help pay for that. And I know the city of White Plains, since they had that dockless bike program that is over, they've put in some bike lanes, and they have a really nice bike corral, it's called. They got money, I think, from New York State, and put in like a huge, like a room where people can park their bikes in a I don't know about climate controlled, but at least controlled from rain or snow, an indoor kind of facility. So outside of Westchester County, I know that on Long Island, there's a company called Pedal Share that I think both Nassau and Suffolk County may have contracts with them, and some of the communities kind of have signed on. So it's clear, it's definitely not as widespread, in the suburban areas, but that's one of the things that we're looking at. But there are challenges in the suburbs, like Lisa mentioned, sometimes the streets don't feel that safe because they're like high speed, or they're narrow. If you think of our Hudson line, it's a little hard to get up the hills. You need like a power assist kind of thing to help you get up the hills. So those are the kinds of things that actually our study is looking at. So I don't know if I completely answered your question, but just to paint a little bit of a broad brush, that it does kind of exist, and we're hoping to perhaps find more communities interested in that.
That's
Robin,
very
you
helpful. Thank you.
absolutely can interject with your expertise.
Oh, thank you. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And Kelly, if you want to build on that with anything that Westchester is doing, please jump in.
Yeah, we have he bikes a lot. His name's Lucas Herbert. He's one of our planners here. So I actually made a note to myself to go talk to him after this call and see what else he may know. But Robin, to your point, I think they built that bike storage facility at the train station, the White Plains train station.
Yes, they did. And to Lisa's point earlier, it's all on city property. So none of it is MTA property. None of it is, the city of White Plains has always had a much stronger bike program, I think, than many other of the Hudson Valley communities. Partially because I think the mayor is a cyclist. and a terrifically and in a good way, like a very active in the cycling community, I think. So I mean that in a good way, like
and
whatever it takes.
Facility is great. I think communities should definitely use more of them. It's safe, secure, easy to get to. And in White Plains, there have been a number of bike lanes installed on the Merrimack Avenue. Very colorful striping, you're in a bike lane. So there are good things happening with biking here, and I'd like to see it expand definitely in Westchester.
Great.
So there is a difference between bikes and these scooter things, which I have concerns about. I mean, there have been some fires on some of these units, and speaking with the people working on the platforms in Grand Central, mentioned before, they've nearly been run over by people who are riding them there, and they should not be. So I mean,
That's the next. I wanted to raise that sort of as an additional topic. So these are, our recommendations are supposed to be focused on how to improve access to MTA facilities, but the e-bikes, the e-scooters, the mini motorcycles, basically, are a growing challenge. Something that the Long Island Railroad Commuter Council is really concerned about, that Metro North has, that you guys have raised a lot of concerns about, that we've spoken to some of the folks who work on the trains at the higher levels. They're really concerned about this. And our understanding is that the MTA at its highest levels, at the safety level, is looking at policies and strategies for how to deal with the growing number of these e-bikes, e-scooters, and basically motorcycles that are on trains. Some of the things we've heard are that with the elimination of the permits, that it's much more difficult for conductors to say, well, you don't have a permit for that, so you can't come on. It doesn't mean, excuse me, necessarily that, paid permits need to come back. One of the recommendations we made for LARCC was that there be that the code of conduct, which was last updated or as posted on the MTA website, was last updated in 2008. Even though there's an update for the bikes on trains page, that the whole code of conduct be updated to include stronger language on what's accepted, what's not accepted, that there be pictures, visuals about these kinds of bikes that are, or what's not allowed, and that be really prominently displayed. And that would give train personnel the opportunity and station personnel a better tool for disallowing unsafe vehicles. URL batteries are less prone to catch on fire. And that's something that we've seen in study after study. Not everybody has or can afford that and these kinds of vehicles. They really are vehicles. Some of them go up to 40, 50 miles an hour. So we know it's a growing problem. We know it's something the MTA is working on. But how do you all feel about joining with LARCC and making a motion to update the code of conduct to improve the language about these e-vehicles and really push it out there to send a letter to the MTA to that effect about our concerns about these vehicles and make a recommendation on how to address them, at least from a information sharing perspective.
I'll make that motion.
Do we have data? I know that the e-bikes are a problem for fires. And do we know to what degree? Because my initial thought is I don't want to be on a Metro North train when an e-bike catches fire, but I don't know how much of an issue it is.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any data on that?
There's growing data. I was reading an article yesterday that looks at there is growing data. It looks at those numbers. Most of the fires occur when their batteries are charging, but not all of them. So people aren't going to charge their batteries on board, but if there's sufficient wear and tear on a non-UL listed battery, it could combust. So I don't know that we've got numbers of what's happened, but they're already banned because they're motorized vehicles. So we also understand that people use them for work. They shouldn't be riding them on the platforms. That's another safety issue. I think limiting those that have been deemed safe, if somebody's going to have them, to those are not. So there's, I could do a Google search, honestly, but I don't know what information it's going to show that's specific to it. But that could be something that we ask, as well, that there be a study, but considering that they're already banned, considering though, however, that people do need them, at the other end of where they're going, it's a delicate balance, but then you have to, number one priority has to be rider safety. So we have somebody looking to see what the NTSB regulations are as well.
I guess I'm torn to an extent as to whether we should be promoting using bike share. It's like, okay, you bike to the station, you get on the train, and then you pick up a bike at another station versus the e-bikes, but I don't have the solution to that. So I totally hear what you're saying, that more people are using e-bikes and need it for work, but it is a safety concern.
So is this legislation, or the rules here for bicycles, e-bikes, scooters? I mean, is there going to be a differentiation, or they're going to treat them all the same?
I believe that this legislation, what we can do is whatever we want. Basically, there are recommendations that we're making to the MTA. What the MTA will do is something I'll find out in my next phone call. But the strategic plan that they're going to put together will take our recommendations into consideration, but also look at access to bridges, to how bikes might work on buses. Do we go the route of some other cities, including Seattle, where I am now, and Route 99 over to Verrazano, and have bike racks on front of buses? What will that do to timing, etc.? Are there one of the things I think that they should look at is how do you differentiate and enforce e-bikes over in bike lanes, because that's gonna, the difference between an e-bike and an e-motorcycle, which is what I call them, but they're really e-mopeds, are pretty drastic. And I think that those are, to me, those are higher power vehicles that could kill somebody if they're not managed properly. But
Lisa, I'm looking right now. Transport for London bans e-scooters and e-unicycles from its network, and this happened back in December because there was a few fires on them.
Right. Well, no, the e-bikes and scooters are not permitted on MTA equipment, but it's not really very well promoted, and it's not really very enforceable.
Lisa?
Yes, Bradley.
So this is Bradley. So I was just looking at some of our working recommendations, and per this topic you guys are talking about now, and I'm not sure if this fits in to our recommendations, but maybe developing definitions of these different bicycle types with the e-bikes, the e-scooters, and I think, Randy, what you're looking at, I think we've looked at that as well, so that riders know exactly what categories these types of bikes fit into and what's allowed when, where, and whatnot. So maybe that's something that we could ask for or recommend within our overall recommendations. So because it's confusing, because even I'm trying to wrap my head around and visualize which bike is what that we're talking about. So I think that's something that we could, per Lisa and my conversation this afternoon, talk about that, but also that could be made in our recommendations to actually define what the different bicycle types are.
Okay, that works.
Lisa, just in terms of considering recommendations, I guess from my perspective, it would be nice to have had a picture of what currently exists, because it seems like, we're all over the place in terms of White Plains being more aggressive, other areas not being more aggressive. But the couple of comments that I wanted to make is, keep in mind that in Westchester, at least in the towns I'm familiar with in lower Westchester, there is this huge explosion of apartment buildings around train stations. And this has, been going on for the last few years. And every time I look up, there is a new building being built in New Rochelle. So I guess one question that I have is, surely these cities have a plan around that? Because what I've heard is that the expectation is a lot of, mostly single people from the city will be more interested in the bird. So one, I'd be curious as to whether we are connecting with, the cities to see what their plans are. And just as a miscellaneous, I know a few years ago, I would occasionally ride my bike to the New Rochelle train station, and there wasn't always a space. I mean, it was difficult to find a space for your bike to lock it there. But those are just thoughts.
So I think bike parking at stations is definitely something that we would consider putting in our that we should consider putting in our recommendations. At Grand Central, there's this Unipod, which is a big enclosed storage pod that is up where people can safely put their bikes out of the elements. And I think, and that's being looked at for expansion. Bike parking has come in a number of different forms. I know on the Long Island Railroad, they had bike lockers, these big metal things, but I think they were underutilized. So working with Robin, the project that Robin is working on that we'll hear more about in July, unfortunately, the timing didn't work out for this month, will, I think, talk about a series of pilot programs that they're looking at that includes working with different municipalities along both railroads at some of these strategies that the municipalities would then implement. Is that correct, Robin?
Yes, that is where we have been in touch with these communities over time, mostly not just to amass the information that we need so that we can understand what strategies, first mile, last mile strategies could work at different locations, because obviously what might work, let's say, in a flat location on Long Island may not work in a hilly location in the Hudson Valley. But we've been in touch with communities, not just to get the background information, but just because, they're our neighbor, right? I mean, their residents are coming to our stations. And so we're trying to understand kind of how they're getting to the stations. And, I know that in the past, we have gotten calls and requests for additional bike racks. And I recall that in Tarrytown recently, it's probably right pre-COVID, some more racks were put in because people were finding that they were going to be, that people were cycling more to the station. So yeah, we are definitely in touch with the communities, and part of this study has actually helped make that connection a little easier. But we are working really through our counties, because there are like 160 land use agencies between Metro North and Long Island Railroad. So that's a lot.
Right.
Okay, so is there anything else that we need to add to this?
If you have
Randy,
any, yes.
Peter has his hand up.
I can't,
Okay.
I'm not seeing the whole thing here with Lisa's just.
No problem.
Okay.
Hey, it's Peter Ramos. So I work at Metro North. I just want to chime in that there is a all agency, I would say, task force and discussion regarding powered and battery operated devices. Obviously, that phrase is sort of the nomenclature that's kind of used to describe everything under the e-bikes, e-scooters, hoverboards that are battery and have some sort of device to them. The conversation and discussions are going to involve a lot of different pieces of the pie. So you have state regulations, you have potentially federal regulations, you also have some city ordinances. So they're going to be looking at size of the equipment, whether it's foldable, whether it takes up space, on board a train. We have physical limitations on the current rolling stock that Metro North and certainly Long Island Railroad have. Subways is kind of a different animal unto itself. So, but the MTA is looking at it from an all agency perspective, looking at the welfare of the customers, our employees, They are weighing in and taking into account all the different pieces of data that are coming about. The power devices. I would say on a first step, one of the things is to make sure they are not charging them either on board our trains and or our passenger stations. There is some certainly potential safety issues, whether it's the batteries, the lithium-ion batteries, and potential fire and or toxicity issues that are being raised nationwide. And certainly there's been a number of different incidences, not at PTOs, but certainly in the area. So there's, again, a lot of different pieces that are being looked at both on board and certainly at passenger stations, whether it's places that we need to provide for people to park their bikes safely and securely, as well as on board. So I just want to share that piece of information that we know at this point.
Peter,
Thank you.
a question, if I could, just a quick question for Peter. On Metro North, they have these racks for bikes that when they are used, I think is very effective. But how does one know if you have a bike, what car to get in order to use those nice bike racks?
So currently the bike racks are only available on the New Haven line on the M8s or whenever the M8s are running.
Okay,
And they're only in the, I believe they're in the B car. So it would be an odd number car. So that's just the current configuration that we've outfitted the rail cars. Again, holistically, these are all sort of part of the conversation that we're looking at. We don't have them available on our coach. We don't have them available on the M7s, which is the other EMUs that we, are the vast majority of our trains that are in revenue service.
Well,
So
the
there are
M3s
limitations of them.
also
Well, the M3s don't. Yeah, the M3s again don't have them either as well. The M3s is a smaller quantity of trains that we're running in revenue. But yes, that's, again, these are all sort of issues that we're trying to figure out. How do you operationalize and maintain a safe environment, but also execute sort of a customer experience that lends itself to the marketplace, where people are, I hate the word demanding, but demanding to be able to use their bikes more frequently and be able to use it seamlessly on our trains, be able to, on board and get off the board and go to their connecting location, so-called first mile, last mile. So again, the Office of System Safety is kind of taking the lead as part of this conversation right now.
and just the last question. So when a conductor sees a person with a bike and directs them to the next car, do they give them the formula so that they know that it's the odd numbered car that the bike is in? Because I'm just thinking if conductors were aware, rather than just saying, go to the next car, telling the person what the formula is for finding the car would be helpful.
Well, the conductors are certainly aware of our operating rules on board trains. So in terms of physical location, they know where the ADA space is, and that happens to be the same exact area where the bike racks are located. Again, the bike is unfortunately a secondary in a situation. If someone does require those areas, they wouldn't be able to put their bike there. Again, we're trying to look at different scenarios because there are, as you know, a number of people with devices that do fold up, that are collapsible. They could certainly go and be stowed potentially in between seats or in the overhead racks, depending on the particular train that they're on. So again, we're trying to look at different variables and various situations, and again, trying to make the environment as customer friendly as possible, but also something that is from a safety standpoint, we don't want to put anyone, both the employees and customers, in a situation whether it's either a hazard or say a bike is blocking an egress, or the corridors to walk up and down an aisle, and obviously the exit doors. So there's a lot of pieces that are being looked at, and obviously the risk reward situation is just another piece that we're having to weigh in and consider.
Peter, are you finding that there are more issues since the permit, since there's the permits are no longer required?
I have not. I check in with our operations folks as far as onboard related matters. There isn't like, hey, today we had X amount of trains and we had 50 problems related to powered devices. So the short answer is nothing. Nothing in terms of a particular piece of data that would inform us in that respect. Are people certainly bringing power and battery devices on board trains? The answer is yes. And again, I for better or for worse, a typical rail car right now is hovering at somewhere between 50 to 35% capacity. So there is room for people to kind of safely stow their bike. The ones that I've seen have generally been some version of collapsible or foldable. So it hasn't really been an issue from a safety standpoint at this point. But again, we're only as good as the next run. So anything unfortunately could potentially happen. We don't want that, but certainly we're cognizant, and our T&E crews are certainly aware of it as well.
When do you think? I'm sorry. When do you think that the recommendations will come out?
I don't know. I think it's going to be a parallel effort. Obviously, they're aware of the law that came through. I guess at the end of the year. So they're working through that information and obviously working through a lot of different departments. So I don't want to be able to. I don't want to kid you. I just don't know the answer at this point.
At the transit and bus committee meetings, there was a discussion about people being able to carry strollers and not having to fold them in the area that they would like to use. And it's all an investigation by a committee. It was alleged there could be a competition between disabled community and mommies with strollers. And they said, no, we never want to have something like that. So where these bikes would go, I don't get to ride the M8s because I don't ride New Haven line that much. But the area is, could there ever be a competition for someone who wants to use one of the disabled seats as opposed to having the bike there?
The short answer is, I don't know if the word is competition, but as it's currently constituted, if the area is occupied, we wouldn't be able to safely put a bike on one of those bike racks. They would have to find an alternative rail car to put their bike on a rail car. Again, and then the other piece is is the bike one of these devices? If it is a bicycle, does it fold up? Can it be folded up? As it's currently constituted, we don't want the bikes, even the person who's holding on the bike to be right in front of the vestibule, in front of a door opening, door closing, because obviously that's an egress where people are going to be coming on and off. So again, these are things that, where the current policies and procedures need to be updated, they need to reflect not only the traditional bicycle, they need to reflect the current conditions, both the power and battery devices. I rode a subway the other day, and I had flagged, with our communications team on subways that, this is a device that was clearly well above the New York City ordinances, and it had likely it was gas powered, but someone who was probably in the space of deliveries, they're coming down and using our subways, we're not seeing that type of device on the commuter rails, thankfully. But that's why it's hard to say how policies and procedures are going to be developed. Is it going to be a one size fits all, or is there going to be slightly different procedures based on the conditions? Our rail cars are different. The volume of passengers is different than, say, a subway car. So subway cars don't have bike racks. there's all sorts of things that we're going to have to consider in this, as we're developing, an updated, policy and procedure to reflect, where we are today.
So with
So
safety being the primary thing, safety, the rules should be specify exactly which bikes are permitted and which are not, and it should be
Randy, I
published.
don't know if that's me dinging here, but I agree, and I'm wondering if they should be separated out. If the bike ped access is something that needs to be developed, it's a legislative mandate, but the safety rules about the e-bikes and the gas-powered bikes, which is being looked at as well, if those changes can happen sooner, I think that will be that would make everybody feel better. So is that something that is possible to expedite? Do you know? Is that something we can push along faster?
I don't have an answer for you. I mean, as you can imagine, anything that is a safety concern is of utmost importance at the MTA. There's been a lot of, obviously, safety related matters that have been raised at not only the board level, but through the traditional media. I know they're working hard on the next steps, and maybe portions of it are determined. I know as the current process for commuter rails is bikes are not supposed to be on during peak hours. Off peak hours is acceptable. They're supposed to be safely stowed away or in bike racks. That's the current operating rules that are in place. Whether that gets updated by the next so-called change in our service plan, which typically is in the fall, I don't have an answer for you at this time. It's the best I can offer right now, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think that goes to our letter, and if we want to facilitate or ask that the review of the safety protocols for the e-bikes be expedited.
Okay.
I don't know that we had a second for that or a vote.
All right. So I made
I
the
would
motion.
second.
Okay. Any
Is anybody
discussion?
opposed?
No, any discussion?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Any opposed? All right, all in favor? Aye.
Aye. The only thing I would just say is be careful with your nomenclature. It's not just e-bikes, it's really powered and battery devices.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to put everything into one space, but that's sort of the reality. It's not just an e-bike. There are scooters that are in this space. There are hoverboards. There are things that are in this area. And again, we're looking at the various types of devices that are out there, the various sizes, the various weights, looking into whatever the city and state either ordinances or laws that are currently on the books to weigh in as well. So thanks.
Okay.
I appreciate
Thank you.
your comment. Okay. All right. So let's move on to
So this is just the last slide in this
Oh, I'm sorry.
presentation, and then I'll take it down. This is just the timeline of when the MTA's plan will be developed. So they're in the process of beginning to establish, or they've begun to, their internal working groups are established, as we've heard Peter discuss, and we've heard from the conversations today. There will be a kickoff and a website that's being developed in the next, I guess this is Bike Month. So in the next week or so, coming weeks, we should hear more about it. And in fact, at the PCAC meeting, you'll get a more comprehensive plan that will overview of this whole issue that will be delivered by not me. So this today was really to inform the conversation that we just had. So you'll hear more about it, and the strategic plan that includes all of these different components will be published in December. So I would ask if there are questions, but I think we've had them.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the next thing is WageWorks update. I know there was some coverage about that the legislation has been introduced in Congress, at least in the House. Do you have any other information on that, Lisa? Or Bradley?
Yes, so the good news is finally that we have a piece of legislation that's been submitted. This is something that Jerry Brinkman from MNRCC started pushing for in June of 2020. When he saw on social media that people were having issues with money, including, and Francina is one of the people who has weighed in on this and was in the New York Times story about it from 2020 as well, about people who have money trapped in these transit benefit programs and were unable to get them out. People who stopped commuting during COVID and didn't stop their deductions in time. So some people had thousands of dollars and unable to remove them. And now we've been working with Senator Schumer's office, Congresswoman Rice's office has been pushing this, but Senator Schumer really needed to get involved. And we went to a press conference with him, several press conferences with him about this issue. And he promised to bring this up and to move this along. And now it is. So it's a piece of legislation that's written and going through the process. So we're a step closer. It would allow for a one-time, not really an amnesty, but ability for people to get their money out. Tax.
And pay taxes, pay the taxes necessary and get their money back.
Yep.
And everyone is on that. All of the people who've been victimized are in agreement. They're willing to pay the taxes. Give me my money.
Yeah. So I mean, people who your money doesn't expire. The only way you lose your money is if you lose your job, change your job, or if you change your job, you can take it with you. But if you're separated from your job, you have 90 days to use it or to move it. But if you could buy monthly passes, you could buy a Metro card, something like that. But if you're not commuting anymore and you just wanted your money, you couldn't get it.
Okay. We at last month's meeting, we passed 2 resolutions, which Lisa sent to Kathy, who acknowledged receipt, but I don't know, it's only like a week ago, so we didn't get a response yet, did we?
Correct.
Okay.
The response was thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. Any idea on, we still have 4 vacancies, now we now have 4 vacancies. Any word from the governor's office on if Rhonda?
Actually, I saw Joan McDonald at an event recently and spoke to her about meeting with her and Emily about filling our Westchester vacancies. Rhonda, as you mentioned, might be a candidate. She would not just have to be recommended by Westchester County, though, could be an elected official from her local elected official. That's
Really?
Yeah, that's MNRCC doesn't need the county executive. It can be an elected official could be her mayor. I think that the protocol tends to be to work with the county executive, but it's not required.
Okay. All right. So she has information. Well, we'd love to have her back.
Yeah. We should follow up with Susan about the gentleman who submitted his name to Rockland as the at-large. Putnam has a vacancy.
In the Bronx.
In the Bronx. Yeah. So we got to follow up with
Marisol.
Thank you. Yeah. We need to meet with them anyway.
Okay. All right. So there was some emails that was sent to us from the Empire State Pastor Association wanting Metro North to do some work to expand the Poughkeepsie Yard. And so we forwarded to Metro North to get it. Oh, Bradley did. Bradley sent it to May asking for them to give us a response on it. Robin, it's not something that you would have heard about?
No, unfortunately, I'm not involved in the Poughkeepsie yard.
Okay, but you, okay. Well,
I
this
mean,
is
I've heard
all-
that there's a project of some sort, but we've been transformed, and so I'm clear,
You look the
I'm-
same.
I work on stationary planning now.
Okay,
But
all
thanks
right.
for asking.
all right. So the last thing that I wanted to say is that the PCAC is meeting in person on the 2nd to Broadway, right?
Yes, correct.
And for those who can't make it.
It's hybrid.
Hybrid. Okay, so that's the last thing I have. So let's go around here. Rich, senior member of MNRCC, you have anything you want to add?
No, but I do have, are you taking up new business?
Sure, sure.
Okay. Now or later?
No, right now.
I started to craft a letter to Steve Newhouse, our Orange County executive, that I recently attended the event.
Now what?
Yeah, for Nanuet. And I'm having a little trouble crafting the justification or why. And I thought maybe I could tap the professional Lisa's staff to help me on it. I could send you what I have and the pictures. But I want to, get this to the county exec, see if we can get the same type of shelter.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, thank
You
you.
know, you know what? I think the more competitive we make it, look what they had that we don't have is always a good thing.
Yeah, it's beautiful, the shelter. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, is there any other new business? I jumped the category. Any other new business? All right, next senior person is Francis. Nice to see you. All recovered?
Fully recovered. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Great, great.
In fact, I'm gonna have a little cheese on my sandwich right now.
Okay. Let's see.
If Francis, when Francis and I started, our hair was dark.
And
Mine
I
still is dark. What are you talking about? What are you saying?
Michael, you have anything to add?
Nope, not this time. Thank you.
And Roz? All right, well, I thank you. So anyway, our next meeting is going to be on the 2nd of June. So thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to join us. And I'll make a motion to adjourn. Get a second?
I'll
Second.
Okay, all right. So we're adjourned, and let me know when we're off video so we can just